She thought she was just going to have a normal debate on a regular Thursday morning. Karoline had done hundreds of TV interviews before. It was part of her job as a conservative speaker. She was used to tough questions and heated arguments, but this time was different. She didn't know she was about to be part of something that would end a famous TV host's career in just one day and start a nationwide debate about how we talk to each other. It all happened live on TV, not recorded, where they could fix things later or cut out the bad parts. Everything was real and happening right then and there, with no chance to take anything back. That's what made it so powerful and so dangerous for Paul Danning. Karoline was invited to speak on the Morning Current, one of the biggest news shows in the country. Millions of people watched it every day to get their news and see interesting debates. The host, Paul Danning, was a big deal in the TV world. He'd been doing this job for 20 years and was known for being tough on his guests. He didn't just ask questions. He liked to push people's buttons and win arguments. He had a reputation for making guests uncomfortable and sometimes even making them angry enough to storm off the show. Today, he was talking to Karoline, a young conservative speaker who wasn't afraid to stand her ground. At just 32, she had become one of the most popular voices for conservative views. She was known for staying calm under pressure and using facts instead of emotions in her arguments. This was supposed to be just another debate about the media, something both of them had talked about hundreds of times before. The show started like normal. The bright studio lights were on, the cameras were rolling, and the crew was quiet. Paul asked Karoline about fake news, a topic that always got people fired up. He said conservative news outlets were spreading lies while his network was telling the truth. Karoline fought back with real examples, showing times when big news networks got stories wrong or left out important facts that changed how people understood events. Things were tense, but still okay. Just another day of political debate on morning TV. Then something changed, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Paul got angry. His face got tight, and his voice got harsh. He wasn't just debating anymore, he was attacking. His whole body language changed. He leaned forward in his chair, his fingers gripping the desk. "People like you," he said angrily, his voice getting louder, "are making this country worse. You pretend conservatives are being silenced when really you're the ones silencing everyone else." The studio got very quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin tingle. The camera operators looked at each other. The producers stood up straighter. Everyone could feel something big was about to happen. Karoline stayed calm, but her eyes showed she was ready for a fight. She had dealt with angry hosts before. It came with the job. But this was different. This wasn't just a host being tough. This was personal. She let the silence hang there for a moment before speaking. Just one word. "Excuse me?" Paul didn't back down. In fact, he got worse. His face was getting red now. "You talk about free speech being under attack, but what you really want is control. Your people." He stopped himself suddenly, but it was too late. Those two words, "your people," they hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the studio knew something big had just happened. The show's producers were looking at each other with worried faces. The crew members got tense, waiting to see what would happen next. One producer started making phone calls, knowing this moment was going to cause problems. Karoline didn't yell. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to do any of that. She just calmly asked, "Would you like to explain what you mean by your people?" Her voice was steady, but there was steel behind it. She knew exactly what she was doing. The tension was so thick you could feel it through the TV screen. Paul hesitated for just a second, but that second was all it took. That tiny pause spoke volumes. The cameras were still rolling, catching every twitch of his face, every bead of sweat starting to form on his forehead. Millions of people watching at home leaned closer to their screens, knowing they were watching something important happen. Paul wasn't used to losing control. His whole career was built on controlling conversations, steering them where he wanted them to go. But this time, he'd lost his grip. Those two words, "your people," changed everything. It wasn't just bad wording. It was what those words suggested. Everyone watching knew what kind of people usually say "your people" in that tone of voice. Karoline knew exactly what was happening. She'd been in situations like this before, but never this clear, never this perfect. She sat back, folded her hands in her lap, and gave Paul room to either fix his mistake or make it worse. She was like a chess player who knew checkmate was coming, just waiting for her opponent to see it too. Paul took a deep breath. His collar seemed tighter now. "I meant conservatives," he said too quickly, the words tumbling out. "People like you who just complain instead of doing anything useful." Even as he said it, he knew he was making things worse. Karoline tilted her head slightly, like a teacher waiting for a student to realize their mistake. "So, just to be clear," she said calmly, each word carefully chosen, "when you said 'your people,' you were only talking about political beliefs." Paul's mouth got tight. 20 years of TV experience told him he was in trouble. If he fought back, people would think the worst about what he meant. If he admitted he made a mistake, he'd look weak. So he tried to change the subject, a trick that had worked for him countless times before. "Oh, come on, Karoline," he laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh people use when they're nervous. "This is exactly what I mean. You know what I meant. But instead of talking about the real issue, you're trying to make my words sound bad and make it all about you." He was trying to sound confident, but his voice had a shake in it now. Karoline didn't flinch. She'd been attacked by better people than Paul Danning. "I don't need to make your words sound bad, Paul. They do that all by themselves." Simple words, but they hit like a hammer. Something flashed across Paul's face. Maybe anger, maybe regret, maybe the first real understanding of the trouble he was in. But he was in too deep now. He couldn't back down. That would mean admitting defeat. And Paul Danning had built his career on never admitting defeat. So he made the biggest mistake of all. You know what? Maybe if conservatives spent less time crying about being victims and more time actually doing something useful for society, we wouldn't be having this talk. The words came out in a rush, angry and bitter. The silence that followed was huge, not just in the studio, but in homes across the country, where thousands, soon millions, were watching. Even Paul seemed to know he'd messed up as soon as he said it. His face showed it. His body language showed it. But it was too late to take it back. Karoline let his words hang in the air before asking, so softly it was almost a whisper, "Are you saying conservatives don't help society, Paul?" He sighed and sat up straight, trying to look confident, but looking cornered instead. "I'm saying all this whining about being cancelled is getting old. But the damage was done, and everyone knew it." Karoline just nodded slowly, her face calm. But her silence said everything. The damage was done, and within minutes, the clip would be all over the internet. In fact, people were already sharing it before the show even ended. What happened in those next few hours would change the media landscape forever. The clip spread faster than anyone could have predicted. People who had never watched the morning current were suddenly experts on Paul Danning. Everyone had an opinion, everyone was taking sides, and in the middle of it all was a simple question. When does tough debate cross the line into something else? The story wasn't just about one host losing his temper anymore. It had become about something bigger, about how we talk to each other, about who gets to have a voice in public discussions, and about what happens when words have consequences. In the end, that's what people remember about that morning. Not just that Paul Danning lost his job, but that something fundamental had shifted in how America talked about itself. The debate wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. What do you think? Should Paul have lost his job, or did cancel culture go too far? Was this justice or an overreaction? Tell us what you think below, and don't forget to follow us for more stories that make you think.